All right, welcome everyone. This is episode 2 of It Depends. I'm your co-host, Elias Khnaser, and I'm joined with Sanjeev Mohan, Anna Bellick, and Traverse Clayton. And today we are going to talk about the repeated AWS outages. AWS folks just cannot catch a break this month. This is the third outage. What do you guys think?
This is very unusual considering that it's coming from US East 1, which is the most mature and the longest running data center that AWS has. So it's surprising that it's not one of the newer ones, but the more established region.
Yeah, what caught me by surprise a little bit is that it's a power outage in one of the data centers in one of the availability zones. Now, I haven't looked closely into root cause analysis to see kind of exactly what happened. But hey, that's the whole point of having an availability zone, is that all the data centers in it are essentially active, and the failovers needs to be seamless, at least for AWS services. That's one of the selling points of why AZs even exist. So AZs, for those that aren't aware, are a collection of physical data centers that are presented as a single logical data center. So if one physical data center experienced an outage, one would think, even though it's a power outage, that the failover should be seamless, no?
Yeah. And the other interesting thing that I read was that there were so many cascading failures that the most difficult part was trying to identify which component had failed. This was for the first one when Route 53 failed. So it seemed like they need better observability, like an entire pipeline analysis, so they can easily backtrack and see which component failed.
They invented this space. They better have a lot of these tools.
Yes.
I think Sanjeev's point is really interesting, right? Like, how often do we think about the uptime or availability of our tools that we use to troubleshoot, right? So our operational tooling, how we manage, monitor infrastructure. In this case, AWS, right? Their internal tooling failed, right? And so we had the
Hey folks, you heard it here first. We have a developer on the podcast that is basically highlighting the importance of ops people.
You can quote him.
Indeed, right? Because like if now the expectation is if I deliver code and it fails, like it's on me, right? You can't point fingers, and so everybody has to work together in unison, right? So if the ability to troubleshoot, do incident response is poor, it reflects poorly on the code. It reflects poorly on the company and what I'm trying to deliver. So 100%.
What was also interesting is they restored the power, but then they had network issues to different regions. So US West 1, I believe, and US East 1, no, US West 2 had internet connectivity issues. And those were impacting services like, I think Hulu was impacted, QuickBooks Intuit was impacted, DoorDash was impacted, Epic Games. So this also had another trickle effect on a bunch of other services that are also running on top of AWS.
I'm no data center expert, but isn't that what like UPSs are for, or USPs on
power? Yeah. Why didn't that kick in?
No, look, in their defense, this type of thing does happen. I mean, even in the most sophisticated data centers, which AWS is a very sophisticated data center, but a power outage will happen. My question, though, is these services are supposed to be very redundant, at least in the same region. So why the failover didn't happen seamlessly would be of interest. And again, I haven't read the root cause analysis. There might be an explanation in there. But I would think for something like this is the type of issue that AWS should definitely be avoiding. And in their defense, this doesn't happen often. I don't remember the last time AWS had a power outage related issue. But
so the question is not a surprise that it happened. I mean, these things are meant to happen. I think Dr. Werner Vogels very articulated this many years ago when he said, things fail and they fail always, So we know these things will fail, but the impact of these things failing is becoming bigger and bigger. I mean, we're just talking about DoorDash and some of these things, but what if a hospital's emergency system was somehow tied to something in the cloud and that came down? Our lives are so much more dependent on the cloud provider being up all the time that this impact will become unacceptable in near future. It already is.
I guess the real question is, do you have a better option?
So that's a very good question, Anna, and I think that's the challenge that we have right now. So Sanjeev brought up a lot of great examples, right? And the bigger AWS gets, and not just AWS, by the way, this isn't limited to AWS. Azure and Google also have issues in 2021, and they've experienced a lot of issues. I mean, the Azure Active Directory problems are another podcast that we would probably spend enough time on. But the larger they become, the more critical infrastructure they become, the more our lives depend on them. The bigger the impact. One of the things I keep saying is if any of these public cloud providers have an extended outage, our economy stops, right? But what can we do about it? I think that's the $1 million question. I think that is the question that everyone is trying to answer is, well, so what do we do? So in the case of AWS, do we use another region? Well, if you had used another region, the impact of US East 1, in this case, trickled to US West 1 and US West 2. So if you had selected those two regions, you would have also had issues. Should it be a multi-cloud? Should you use a different cloud provider? That's not necessarily the perfect answer. That has a lot of challenges on its own. So yeah, I mean, I have some ideas, but I'd love to hear from y'all. What do you think customers can do?
I don't think I'm known for loving multi-cloud, but I do appreciate the irony of saying that you're going to address the immense complexity problem of managing something like AWS by taking it on yourself and managing a multi-cloud architecture where you believe you have greater or more robust redundancy than AWS itself or Azure itself. I think that's a pretty difficult ask for most organizations.
Well, I mean, I think it comes back to, what's your business continuity strategy, right?
Yeah.
And how critical are the workloads? How much downtime can you tolerate for a given application or a given workload, right? If it's a reporting system, I may be able to deal with 1-2 days lag. And so if it goes down, not a big deal, right? If it's transactional, like that's a different story. It's critical path to revenue, impacts my revenue stream, business, and potentially my customers. And so that's a different story. And the level of investment that you make in those different scenarios is different, right?
So Travis, let's assume it's a critical tier 1 application. It's transactional. Well, what can they do? I mean, what are the options in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's the application itself, right? But also, how do you diversify your supply chain, right? If your application is, everything is dependent upon something else, right? To use the analogy of like turtles all the way down, or the Russian doll analogy, like there's one thing inside of another, and you have to think about those dependencies, right? And there's this term, software supply chain that people love to use, but you're just one cog in that machine, and so you have to think about all the other cogs in the machine. And if one of those breaks, what do you do about it, right? What's your contingency? What is your strategy there?
Yeah. So since I look at data and analytics space, this gets very tricky because even if you have the same cloud provider, but you're in two different regions, you doing synchronous replication of data is not always recommended because of the latency. So now you're talking about asynchronous replication, but now we are talking about multi-cloud, which means now you have to have an identical stack, the entire software supply chain, with the application, the load balancer, the application, the database server, and some of that database server needs to be kept in sync with your primary. And that data consistency is a very big problem. Now, if you are, to Travis's point, if your application is not mission critical, you can do eventual consistency and somehow you can recover. But for transactional load, you need that strong consistency. And that's where it technically it's possible, but the cost can become prohibitive.
Well,
And
would be where I would go as a devil's advocate, is to say, like, how much does it cost you to build this redundancy into your application, and how much money would you actually lose if it just went down?
right.
Because those numbers can be quite disparate depending on the outage, the length of outage, what the app is actually doing. So it's always this like this risk calculation and this cost calculation in your mind, and like humans are really bad at calculating risk actually. So that's kind
Also,
of
I mean, so one thing to keep in mind though is even prior to cloud, most customers needed a DR plan, and that DR plan in most cases, was another data center of some sort, whether it was co-location or another co-location for your primary co-location. And then you still had to figure out how to replicate the data, how to do active-active or active-passive, depending on the distance of that colo, that DR site from your primary site. So this is a challenge that even before cloud, organizations always had. This is not new. The question is, how do we do it in the cloud era, especially if we're using PaaS services, DBaaS services from this cloud provider? If someone's on DynamoDB, your options are limited, to be honest. I mean, other than replicating to another region within AWS, or in this case, maybe the idea now becomes replicate to multiple regions. And I do think after these outages, these cloud providers need to be able to step in and, to Anna's point, give some kind of either a discount program, some kind of an incentive to say, hey, you should have redundancies in more than one region within my, cloud infrastructure. And if you have it, if you're using another region, maybe the cost is X. But if you're using two other regions, then maybe the cost is Y, and they're getting a price discount there, so that they're taking the time, the effort of at least their tier 1 applications being replicated in multiple regions in the hopes of avoiding some kind of an outage. Now, look, at the end of the day, and I say this all the time, Earth is a single point of failure. So there's only so much you can do, right? Some type of risk we have to tolerate. But I think here it becomes a question of, operationally challenging and cost, and the cloud providers have a duty to do something to help.
You bring up a good point, Eli. I mean, this is an age-old problem, right? I mean, business continuity, right? It existed before cloud. It'll exist after cloud, right? And
there is no after cloud.
We'll see. So, but effectively, right? Beforehand, it's like, okay, we need another location, right? Smoking hole. This location, we happen to be in a floodplain. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why your data center could fail. And then, it was more looked at as an infrastructural problem, right? We'll replicate the entire infrastructure to this other, landing zone data center. We'll use maybe something like SAN replication, something you can't do in cloud, right? I can't replicate my SAN on premises into AWS or Azure or any other cloud provider. So the tools that were relied upon, and also the general philosophy around disaster recovery, that whole mentality needs to change and get flipped upside down. So to your point earlier about, a developer caring about the operational tooling, well, that's inherently important to the application now, right? So those availability policies, how you do business continuity, need to be thought about more in terms of your application and at that specific application and what you're going to do in the case of a disaster, right?
I mean, I guess the sad reality is that this whole like code build once, deploy anywhere story is kind of a lie, actually, when you talk about real enterprise workloads. It sounds great on paper and in theory and in PowerPoint slides, but if you actually try to do that in a disaster scenario, that's oftentimes just not feasible, right? Because there's so many dependencies on the cloud provider itself, which is how you get value out of the cloud, right? That's how you get value for that bill that you get every month. But at the same time, it does lock you in, and then your failover becomes not so simple at all. Not so simple as we'd like to believe, anyway.
Like DNS, right? I mean, DNS. I mean, right there. I mean, if you have to do a fast failover with DNS, you're screwed. I mean, it's not going to happen.
So the change between what we did in the past and how we do today is that in the past we had full control. if I built my DR facility, then I bought identical, let's say the Cisco routers and the web server, the app server, the database, all the hardware, and software. But today we've done a trade-off between management, ease of management, and control. So now I've ceded control over to my cloud provider, and I expect them to take care of all my failover and all of that. And the whole idea is actually very good. The idea is that I, as an end user, should focus on my business and not on this undifferentiated heavy lifting, as AWS calls it. But now, now if I'm going to pay a price where I don't know if that failover will happen, then I think the conversation needs to shift back to control. And maybe this is a time when we need sort of a cross-cloud management, single pane of glass layer that has the ease of, that gives some control back to the end user, and not just give up the entire control. I don't know how you feel about that, but I think we need to rethink how much control the end user has versus the cloud provider has.
Well, so I mean, the challenge there is even before we ceded control, right? So virtualization in the data center kind of abstracted all of this. So you didn't necessarily need like for like in your DR sites.
Mm-hmm.
With the cloud providers, you can still do the same thing. You can keep most of the control. So if you stay at the infrastructure layer and you build things around containers, around virtual machines, around data, those three things are very portable. I mean, at that point, you're looking at, well, how do I replicate? How much data do I have? You would need a replication strategy, but you would essentially be in full control. You're deployed on AWS today, and AWS fails. Take your data, take your VMs, take your containers, and as long as you've done your replication and the data's on the other side, you can stand up very quickly. The challenge becomes when you go up the stack. Yeah. When you're starting to use these PaaS services. And to your point, it would be nice if there was, and Travis, help me out here, if there was some kind of a way to connect a DynamoDB with a Cosmos DB. I mean, they're completely different schemas, and the APIs are different. The failover, I'm sure, will be different, and it's not easy. I know. I mean, this is always, nirvana. This is the stuff that we want is, for these cloud providers, yes, we want them to compete, but we also want them to integrate so that we can reduce some of these challenges. But it's also difficult to think that you can take something like a DynamoDB or something like Lambda functions and move them over to a Cosmos DB or Azure functions. But the PaaS layer, I think, is where a lot of these challenges come in. That's where we're ceding control a lot, Sanjay.
I too want a hoverboard for Christmas.
I'm with him.
A hoverboard. They call a hoverboard that's not actually a hoverboard, but an actual hoverboard.
Like a Back to the Future one where it actually fly on top of the water.
Yeah, exactly.
You can get that as an NFT now.
Oh, nice. No, I mean, yeah, to your point, like that's the Holy Grail, right? Like single pane of glass, everything works together, everything's kumbaya. The reality is that's not how it works, right? We have seen like industry and customers will push these providers for standards. We see S3 is now the standard for object storage. And I don't think that was necessarily by design, but it was just by sheer, brute force in using. So, MinIO, every other cloud provider has an S3 compatible API, right? That's the reality. And how, where does that stop? Where does it keep going? But in lieu of having, standard APIs across clouds, we have open source projects, some successful, some have failed, right? Like JClouds is a great example of, hey, let's build this giant abstraction layer over every cloud provider and every API. And at the end of the day, it was a miserable failure, right? Now, Kubernetes may be a little bit more success, right? I mean, there's a lot of companies using Kubernetes. There's solid momentum there, but it's still not necessarily the be all end all, Uber cloud API. Although Google might want you to think that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Kubernetes is definitely having a positive impact. I mean, even if we look at some of the announcements from Ignite this year, Microsoft is taking a lot of their past services and allowing you to kind of port them into containers and move them pretty much anywhere you want. But in this case, you can move them onto like an Azure stack on premises. So making those past services portable, I think that's pretty smart. I think it's one of the first steps. That's one of the approaches. But let me ask you something else. So I've talked to some customers where, especially financials, where in order to avoid these types of outages by a single cloud provider, they were coding against multiple cloud providers' native services at the same time, and then relying on something like DNS for a failover, right? So, and developing the application so that it works with DynamoDB, it works with Lambda, it works with a lot of the native services on AWS, but doing the same thing on Azure, having the same stack essentially on Azure. And what they're doing is either through load balancing, they're directing load. Some of the load goes here, some of the load goes there. I don't know how they're synchronizing the databases, by the way. I don't know, but there are some companies that are trying, and it's expensive, that are trying to code against the native platforms at the same time. What do you think of that? Could that be a solution?
I think you got to brand that shift disaster recovery left.
Say that again, Anna.
I said shift left of disaster recovery is what that sounds like. We'll just code it for every possible.
Well, I mean, there's an example out there, BBVA Bank. They created a framework called Hydra, which was kind of like doing that, right? And it worked for a small portion of their apps, right? And they would drain the front end and move it. But I mean, there is specific expertise that you need for Azure. You know this. Everybody knows this. There's specific expertise you need for AWS. When it comes to things like infrastructure as code, HashiCorp Terraform is one example, right? Where they're trying to provide an abstraction layer. They have a domain specific language called HCL. You basically program your infrastructure in a declarative way in HCL, which is effectively YAML. But then there's adapters for each individual cloud provider. And those adapters have lag. They have lag time. So if you have changes in the cloud provider APIs, there's going to be lag there as to when you get access to those. And even within those Terraform scripts, you're having to do very specific things for those individual cloud providers, right? So the question becomes, is something like that of value, even though we're going to have to still have specific expertise for the individual clouds, right? Now, maybe you can reduce the blast radius of that expertise and make it very specific and use less people or resources for that. And then maybe everyone has a common language like HCL or something that they talk to. But there's other things like I think Anna mentioned, Crossplane, Pulumi, basically trying to build a common language to communicate, how you define your infrastructure across multiple cloud providers.
Yeah.
But I mean, you're still trusting somebody, like you said, to maintain those plugins and those connectors, because your team isn't going to do that unless you're going to be a big open source contributor. And the more of these tasks we create for ourselves, the more I have to ask, why not just bring it back on-prem and manage it yourself if you have so much money and time, right?
So the classic adage is all problems in software can be solved with a layer of abstraction.
Right.
Layers of abstraction, right? So at some point you have too many layers of abstraction and it just creates complexity.
So Anna brings up an awesome point, by the way. Sorry, Sanjeev, were you going to jump in?
Yeah, I was just thinking that, all four of us represent different aspects of the stack. So Eli, you're on infrastructure, Anna's got security, Travis has applications, and I'm on the data side. So I was just wondering if future architectures, like this scenario we find ourselves in, if this is going to push more and more services to become like database services, especially to become just an API call. These are serverless. So when Anna says, disaster recovery should shift left, I'm saying that maybe disaster recovery should be the last of my concerns, because my third-party database provider, and I'm using third-party here on purpose, is already already has this cross-cloud DR or distributed architecture. And so now what happens is that I have my infrastructure layer with some load balancers and my DNS servers, which points to the applications, which is like an API gateway, which is also third party. And that API gateway is all it's doing is the application of making REST API calls or GraphQL calls to the database server. So this way, if something fails, then all I have to do is change either my DNS or my API gateway connection, and I'm now using the same database provider. And I'm sorry, I'm giving a very database centric view, but this kind of like architecture probably is less onerous on the end user companies.
I mean, I like your dream. I think it's very charming and beautiful. And if it ever happens, I will tell everyone that it was your idea. But I think you're kind of going to recreate the same problem, right? Like the problem we have now is we took a bunch of complexity, we handed it off to somebody else, the cloud provider, and they've experienced a failure that we have no control over fixing. What you're suggesting is actually creating even more complexity and handing it off to somebody else so that we can have more kinds of failures that we can't fix.
So you're right. So you're absolutely right.
All the way down.
The same thing.
No, I know
There's
no getting around complexity. I completely understand. So yeah, go ahead, Eli.
No, so I agree with Anna. I was thinking exactly the same thing when you were talking, but I also agree with you. I personally don't think there's a way around this. I think there's going to be more complexity. The only way that we're going to be able to do this is, unfortunately, digging deeper. To Anna's earlier point, I don't think the answer is going back on premises. So it's not a repatriation conversation for a variety of reasons. Again, the business has changed. The nature of how we're operating has changed. Going back on premises was going to be significantly limiting. And while we will address some issues potentially, we will miss out on so many opportunities that it will just force us back in, right? So again, whether we like some of the nexus of forces that are forming around us, like blockchain, like NFTs, like these metaverses and omniverses and all of these things. I mean, you've got companies like NVIDIA and Microsoft talking about them, right? So this isn't, some blockchain or some crypto that's talking about them. No, this is, when Microsoft talks about something, it's going to happen in the enterprise. When NVIDIA talks about it, it's going to happen. So as we look forward, those companies that decide to go back on premises are going to simply slow down their progress. So unfortunately, the answer is going to be more complexity. I just don't see a way around it.
I mean, yes, I don't know if that's entirely fair. Because I would go back to our prior point about risk, right? So there are applications today that run on premise and that will maybe never run in the cloud for lots of reasons, like security reasons, because they're required to be on-prem by law, or because they're air-gapped, or whatever other reason. For DR reasons, right? Maybe it's some life-supporting system that can't go down because AWS screwed up their monitoring or whatever, and you don't even want to take that chance because it's so important. So those things will always exist. So I don't think it's
we're
really
going to be in a hybrid environment for the foreseeable future.
Right. So the repatriation, I think, story, as much as I am not like a big fan of it, you may be in a situation where you discover that you essentially made a mistake in your risk assessment, and then you may repatriate a workload and keep it on-prem. So that's
one workload here and there. That's continuous optimization. I agree, but moving completely out, that's kind of where I'm saying I don't think that's the right thing to do.
I think that's also unlikely, but I think the tolerance for complexity is also complex, right? I mean, you have to understand to some extent what's happening underneath the covers, because at the end of the day, like if the power goes out and the data centers go down and everything is terrible, it's still your business that suffers, right? AWS may lose your business, but you're the one that's losing money to kind of pay your bills and keep your lights on.
So that brings up a great point. So let's take a real world example, and maybe because we've been admiring the problem, we've been talking about some solutions, but let's take a real world example. And let's move away a little bit from enterprises, because there are a lot of people that are not necessarily an enterprise that get impacted. Case in point, my dad, I mean, those of you that don't know, my dad owns a restaurant. The POS system is called Revel Systems. And I get a call from my dad a few days ago, basically says, your beep doesn't work. And I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to go check my beep, right? So I check, and lo and behold, my stuff's working. So I call him up. I'm like, hey, my stuff's working. It didn't even occur to me that, well, Revel is a cloud-based POS, but it didn't occur to me, like, I don't know, for whatever reason, I didn't make a link between my dad and AWS, right? So a few days later, I get an email from Revel Systems that basically profusely apologizes for the outage and all of the things that happened because it was related to the AWS outage. So I go back, and I didn't want to have this conversation, but I'm explaining to my dad that, hey, there was an AWS outage. And his first words were, what is AWS and how do I not rely on it? And I'm like, well, you can't, because your POS provider relies on it, and I didn't even know that it does. But now that I know that it does, what am I supposed to do? This is the dilemma that I'm in. Okay, now I know that my SaaS provider that I rely on to run my day-to-day business uses AWS, but I have no control over it. Like, what do I do?
So I think this is where the responsibility now shifts to Rebel. They need to ensure that they can withstand an outage of this kind. So I'm starting to realize that, maybe, different providers need to specialize in their space and let others do the job of different layers. For example, all the hyperscale cloud providers should work on ensuring that they have the best infrastructure in place, and they already do. They are by far the most sophisticated, and they have thousands of data centers all over the world with undersea submarine cables and all of that. That is their forte. But then if you go a layer above, where Rebel sits and a database vendor or an application vendor, they're the ones who should build a multi-cloud layer on top of that. Above that is maybe the identity and access management layer needs to be multi-cloud. So I think, and I know this is probably also introducing more layers of complexity, but instead of having one vendor be responsible for the entire stack, so if something fails, everything fails on top, I think we need to go more horizontal. And that way, if I have a database, and I'm trying not to get into naming vendors, but there's some vendors in database management that are already multi-cloud. So it is their job to monitor and say, oh, this region has failed, so I need to shift all my connections into a different region or different cloud.
But I think bringing it back to Eli's example, right? I mean, there's inherent risk in outsourcing anything, right? So anytime you outsource something, there's going to be risk involved, and you're accepting that risk for convenience, for expediency, because maybe you don't have that competency in house, right? Like your dad's not going to build, he's not going to build his own POS, right? But he could have a contingency in place. So Revel's not the only cloud POS out there, right? There's definitely others. So what is your contingency plan, right? When Revel goes down.
So that's a very difficult proposition. It's very difficult, and this.
It is a difficult proposition. Let me add one point.
Yeah.
Like, don't assume anything about who you're outsourcing to. You may have an assumption that Revel, says they're gonna have 99.999% uptime. But, just like, how are they diversifying their supply chain, right? What is their backup plan, disaster recovery plan? Like, so you should scratch the surface and dig a little bit deeper. And to Anna's point, when the lights go out, like, do you know how to change a light bulb? There's a term out there called mechanical sympathy, right? Mechanical sympathy effectively says I should know a little bit about the things that I'm working with, tools around the house or my POS system.
So here's the challenge, right? And I think I have at least a suggestion for a solution. Even if my dad had another cloud POS system or a POS system, even though the ones that they make for on-prem right now, I mean, it's difficult to find them, but let's assume that, right? And even if I get all of my data out of it, right? Even if I get the whole menu out of it and I successfully import it into this second, cloud POS system or another POS system, everything's up and running. The hardest challenge for my dad is going to be training, right? So everything's up and running now, but the staff don't know how to use this POS system. And we're talking about a restaurant, so my ability to fail over and continue to operate is limited. I mean, things will be significantly delayed. So what maybe I'm proposing is, yes, maybe my dad can try to think of all of these things. I don't think it's fair. I think Revel, for example, in this situation, should offer another tier of protection, because again, from their perspective, it's going to be expensive for them, for me to go to them and say, hey, you know what? I want you to diversify into another AWS region, or maybe I want you to diversify onto another cloud provider. But I think it's a fair request as long as they say, hey, we're willing to offer you this service, or we have this service, but it will cost you X on top of what you're already paying. Then they're basically putting it back on me. Hey, if you want the non-stop, continuous, as much of an uptime as possible, I have that on another cloud provider, but it's going to cost you. That, I think, would be a way out, as opposed to me trying to figure out how to reverse engineer something or to keep it up and running. It'll be extremely difficult and more expensive for me to do it, but I'd be willing to pay.
Well, there's another option, which is something we all pay for every month, and it comes like clockwork, which is insurance.
Oh man,
That's right.
I mean, that's a fair point, though, right? Because my question actually to Eli would be, what is going to incentivize the SaaS provider to do that? Like, why would I just not offer that second tier and not do all that work? I mean, I only have so much money to invest in my business, right? So why am I building redundancy if I can just take the hit and be like, I'm sorry?
Well, so that's a very good point, right? And time will tell. But my assessment of this is they will be forced into it. So what we were talking about earlier, what Sanjeev was bringing up earlier also, is the more we become dependent on these cloud providers, the more services are running on top of them, the more people get impacted. So the blast radius is going to impact more businesses. These businesses, whether they're small or large, like my dad, are going to start to go to providers that are going to offer some level of insurance. So if my dad has another 2 or 3 outages in 2022, at some point he's going to come to me and say, okay, I want to move off of Revel, and I want to do it in a structured manner. So we'll take care of the training. We'll do it over time. We'll do it in a good way, but find me a provider that's not reliant just on AWS. At that point, I can go do my search, and let's assume I find X, and X is offering me AWS and Azure at this price. And I'll go back to him and say, it's going to cost you a little more. And he's going to look at the outages that he had in 21 and say, I lost this much money. Yes, I'll buy that insurance policy. Yes, I'm willing to switch. So I think the savvy SaaS providers are going to pivot. Now, yes, they are going to take there's an investment here, but I just don't see what the alternative is. I mean, some companies might be okay, depending on the nature of your business. Hey, I'm willing to accept downtime. But at some point, some downtime is unacceptable. So what if AWS doesn't recover in 6 hours?
What I was talking about was something different, was a third party providing insurance, just like for fires, physical damage, right? I mean, if you're wholly dependent upon different cloud providers and there's a negative impact to your business, SLAs only cover the downtime for the service you're paying for. So you're only going to get reimbursed for whatever.
So you're talking cyber insurance.
Sure. Yeah. I mean,
by the way, Google is offering that. I believe it's in beta, but Google Cloud offers that.
I want to point out something which is very critical. So Eli, when we were talking before this call about the impact of AWS going down on your father's restaurant, I think, if we just look at it and we say, okay, what's a big deal? A few hours, point of sale system is down, but it's far more than that. And because what happened, Eli, in your father's case, is that the orders couldn't be fulfilled in the kitchen, and the restaurant patrons started leaving bad reviews. Now, not in particularly in your father's restaurant's case, but in general,
No, he got bad reviews on bad service, so it did impact him. And trying to explain to customers it was AWS's fault.
Exactly. So now what happens is that the next time somebody wants to come to this Lebanese restaurant, they look at the reviews and say, no, I don't think I want to go there. So the lasting impact of that one outage of 4 hours could be years of poor business for that business.
Well, also consider the time it happened. So December is the busiest time for him, right?
Yeah.
So it couldn't have come at a worse time for a variety of reasons. But he's a very small example. I mean, look at, there's other customers that are 20 times bigger with the revenue, or maybe the type of business, of the nature of their business will be a lot more critical. And there's only so much that you can lose from a revenue perspective. There are companies that are very tight on their revenue. So, hours could significantly impact them.
Yeah.
So to our points earlier, we have to then assess how much outage can we take, but what can be done about it, I think
having two point of sale systems actually reminded me of this funny thing that people used to say some 15, 20 years ago. If you should always own two Jaguars. So you have one to drive and the other one's in the garage. So, but
That's
now
right.
you don't hear that, because I think the quality of cars have become so good that, it'll be an aberration if an expensive car like Jaguar, fails, so.
That actually is my final question, maybe, are we too picky? Isn't the quality of uptime now better than it was at any other time in the history of IT?
It is, but the challenge is because there's so much relying on them. That's why I call them critical infrastructure. Because there's so much on AWS, now the outages, although they're a couple of hours, the impact is so large. So it doesn't matter if the uptime is high.
That's true.
Let me just say this though, if you were to do fault analysis across your entire application, that would be one point of failure. There's many other points of failure. There's humans involved, right? They mess things up, they fat finger things. We've actually seen outages in cloud providers from humans fat fingering or over provisioning something. The classic example is the 2012 Knight Capital. The company went out of business in 40 minutes because they lost $500 million because they forgot to update one of the front ends, right? There was a human that was applying those updates and they left one out. So there's, that critical infrastructure, while it is a very important piece of everything, it is one point of failure, right? There's bugs, 0 days, CVEs, humans, process. I mean, there's so many things. Owning code at all is a liability, right? Just from the people you have to hire, how much investment you have to make into it, and every time you release an update, there's an opportunity for failure.
Yeah, so that's the question, right? Is if you have a finite amount of resources to invest in whatever in your business and security and development and whatever you're doing, so is it really worth your time to worry about uptime insurance and cloud provider outages that are inevitable? And wouldn't you rather invest in something else, like making sure you don't get ransomware or whatever other ways your business could go under because you didn't take care of some other aspect of the stack that you actually do own?
Well, so that's the art of running a business, right? This is the load balancing act that every business owner is going to have to figure out well, they're kind of all important. Where do you put the emphasis? Where do you put the investment? It depends, right? But I think, if we continue to see some of these outages, I think the emphasis will shift to that. But more importantly than the outages, because again, to Travers's earlier point, it might take just one outage to knock you out of business. So although we could have years upon years of stability, uptime, and maybe no investments in it, I know companies, by the way, that don't believe in DR, don't have a DR strategy. They're willing to accept the risk. They don't want to pay for an insurance policy that they may never use. So I know companies that don't have that. But it takes one outage, one incident, and depending on the nature of your business, that could wipe you out. So as a business owner, as an enterprise, these are some of the things that, whether it's a focus group or an assessment, these are the things that have to be weighted is, where do we put the investment? How much do we put of an investment? Do we go multi-regions within the same provider? One region, two regions? Do we go multi-cloud? Do we go back on premises? Do we go on premises for some of the workloads, but not all of the workloads? But someone definitely needs to be assessing risk.
System design. Yeah, you need somebody to be good at designing resilient, high availability, high uptime systems.
Yeah,
I don't think there's going around that. Even if you say, I'm going to be fully PaaS or SaaS in the cloud, you still need and we were talking about business continuity planning earlier. I don't think the goals of BCP change at all. It's exactly the same goal. How we do it changes, but the mission remains the same.
The problem with BCDR and BCP is we've always done it very poorly, very, very poorly, even before cloud.
Correct. Yeah.
You know, nobody's really done BCDR.
I mean, I know so many companies with SAP implementations, and they've got some cold standby data center, and they've never tested the DR.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
not going to actually work when they have to trigger it.
Right. And also there have been cases where people have said, I have a database in my primary, I'll do, infrastructure level replication, block by block replication. So guess what? If you have a corruption in your primary and you discover it a week later, you go to your secondary, it has the same corruption. So this is where, it has to be at the business level. But yeah, to your point, I mean, people have done BCP but never tested it. It's like how many people, and I think it's just human nature, how many people ever check the tire pressure of that spare tire in the back of the car? Almost, you never check it, right? So when you need it and you realize it's out of air, that DR is of no use.
Yeah. So with the time left, I think let's go around the room, and maybe now that we've talked about it a lot, we've talked about suggestions, let's each of us maybe give 1 to 3 bullet points that we think are things that enterprises, small or large, SaaS providers, small or large, should be doing to help in this situation. And that's kind of maybe how we wrap this up. So who wants to go first? Happy to go first, but who wants to go first?
I'll go first. Mine is kind of boring, but we're so bad at it that I think we should just actually, be honest about it for once. And you really should have a somewhat granular view of risk. Like, you should have an idea about which applications you're running and where and why. And your teams that own those applications and your leadership should be aware of what happens when they go down, whether it's because of a cloud provider or an internal failure or some other reason, right? And if you actually have this understanding of your infrastructure, then you can start taking steps to deciding that, like, for these 38 things I've accepted the risk, it's fine. And for these 4, I'm going to focus on doing something about it. Because until you make that choice, you actually can't do anything useful, because you have like too many things to worry about and you're just panicking.
I like it. I mean, look, maybe those that are watching us or listening to us maybe aren't gonna love this, but I think there's a really good point that Anna's making, in that assess the risk, understand the risk, categorize the risk, act on the risks that you can, and some of the other stuff that happens, we're just gonna have to take it as it comes, recover from it, and move on. I think it's a very realistic view of things. I really like it.
So to Anna's point, I think we need to assess workloads a level deeper. I think this notion of cloud and on-prem being binary needs to go away. And what I mean by that is, if I were to plot my workloads on, say, X and Y axis, and I have how often do I use a product and how long that product runs, I have to look at it, so the usage, the resource usage, and the duration. Some workloads that are elastic in nature, they don't use my resources 100% all the time, and I only need them for some time. They must always be in the cloud. For example, training machine learning models, I'm not training them that frequently. I need 10,000 GPUs, do it in the cloud. But for some of the applications that need 100% of CPU, they're being run 100% of the time in the day, I really need to think about, do I really need it to be in the cloud? And if it's in the cloud, then how do I ensure that it will have that kind of usage? So I think we need to look at what belongs in the cloud versus co-location versus on-premises.
So you scrutinize the application process, application assessment process, and do a better job placing these workloads where they need to be placed. I think that's a very good advice. It still would need DR for those that are in the cloud or on-prem. So we would have to circle back to that, but I think that's really good advice. Travis?
And if I were to give a quick example.
Yeah, no, please go.
if you look at, let's take Intuit as an example. So TurboTax in the US, the tax filing deadline is April 15th for most people. So TurboTax is used heavily, like 100, I don't know, 100 million people, or I don't know how many, but dozens of millions of people use it in a very short period of time. Why would I have an infrastructure on-prem for something like that? But when you look at Netflix, we say Netflix is all in the cloud, but the Netflix content which is being streamed is not in the cloud. It is actually on these appliances called Open Connect that Netflix sells to the ISPs, and it's in their data centers. So you can see that there's a continuum of how and where we deploy things, and then of course the DR has to be based on our deployment strategy.
Awesome. All right, great. I'll go. I've got 3 takeaways. Number 1, don't do the peanut butter approach. So that's an anti-pattern. You don't apply the same strategy to all of your applications, data, and workloads when it comes to multi-cloud. You've got to do the cost-benefit analysis, right? It's a big investment in skills, resources, time, money. Make sure that you understand, I think classic example is the, food cafeteria app for your company, right? Like, don't apply every best practice in multi-cloud architecture to something that if it goes down, it doesn't really impact anybody, right? So number 2 would be don't assume anything. So if you're a consumer of third-party services, you're outsourcing to a cloud provider, to other SaaS providers, don't assume anything about them, right? Ask questions, right? Understand what is their strategy for disaster. If it's a SaaS provider, how are they diversifying their supply chain? And that would be my number 3. If you are the provider of things, you should diversify your supply chain for those mission critical applications that are core to your business, that are strategic. 100% make that your supply chain.
Wow. Yeah. So those are all great suggestions. Let me wrap it up by having a few of my own. And again, there's really no perfect answer here. I'm gonna take the providers angle here and put a little more of the emphasis on the providers, just because I feel like, again, we're starting to rely so much on them that I feel like they have to help a little bit more at a cost. Nothing's going to come free. But for example, in the case of AWS, and again, the suggestions I'm going to make are easier to implement in the US. We have more regions in the US. And when you look at something like Europe, the availability of regions within different countries and the conversation on sovereignty and a whole bunch of things get a little more complicated. But I think in the US, AWS should offer some kind of incentive for deployments on multiple regions. And here I'm talking about cost incentives and how much is it going to cost someone to do that. And maybe on multiple regions, because again, if what we saw this month is an indicator, is that one region is potentially not enough. So I would say look at diversifying within the same cloud provider across multiple regions. I know it's expensive, but it's expensive from a cost perspective. From an operational perspective, it's automated. If you're deploying it on one region, you could do it on multiple. And here the ominous is on AWS to offer incentives. I would also say look at multi-cloud. I'm starting to become more and more convinced, although I'm a very strong believer in the PaaS services and going up the stack. But being portable using Kubernetes and containers and VMs and data offers me a lot of ability to be portable, to implement a lot of automation, to be able to replicate on a continuous basis. Again, it'll be incentives on the second cloud provider. So if I'm on AWS, Azure should give me an incentive. Hey, replicate your data to me. And because I'm your backup, I'm willing to offer you some kind of an advantage, some kind of a cost advantage, because you're replicating to me. From an Azure perspective, if they ever fail over to Azure, Azure has the opportunity at that point of keeping that customer as a production customer. So there's incentives there. But for the smaller providers, I would say wherever possible, offer a second tier at a cost. Hey, we're on AWS right now. We can offer you a multi-cloud opportunity, but it will cost you this much. So I'm gonna put the focus a little more on the providers. Again, easier said than done. There's no perfect answer, but I'm gonna focus on it from that perspective.
And by the way, Eli, heard of cases where I've spoken to some large customers who are in one cloud provider, but their DR is in Google Cloud.
Sure.
And Google Cloud actually reimburses them for the egress cost.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, this is where we have to get, the customers have to get creative here. But I think the takeaway is, and I think Anna highlighted this, you and Sanjeev highlighted, Travis and Sanjeev highlighted this, is truly understanding the different layers, the dependencies, and putting an emphasis on transparency so that if you're using third party, at least you understand what their dependencies are as well. You probably can't do anything about it, but at least you are aware of what's going on. That opens up good conversations, I think.
Yeah, very true.
All right. I think with that, we're going to wrap up this podcast. I hope this was enjoyable for everyone. If you like this, make sure you subscribe so that you're alerted the next time we upload a new podcast. Thank you very much for watching us or listening to us, and we will see you all in the next one.
Thank you so much.